What's happening, Bills Mafia? Ryan Thomas here, back again for another episode of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm joined by a returning guest of the show, Zach Vaughn of the Buffalo Fanatics. Zach, thanks so much for joining me, buddy. I can't wait to dive into this 2021 Buffalo Bills draft class. Get all your thoughts on each pick in this draft. Let the audience know what to expect for this upcoming season from these rookies that are now the newest members of the Buffalo Bills. First, I want to remind everyone that's tuning in, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, checking out the show live on the stream here. You can also tune into this show after the fact on the audio side of things, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Anywhere you find your podcast, you can find my show. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Zach, welcome back, buddy. It's been a bit.
Yeah, it's been a long and crazy, what feels like 5 years, what was probably like 2 months since the last time. I mean, we had the draft, obviously, and now we're hitting that point where you're kind of in between post-draft and before training camp. So getting into that bit of a limbo where everyone's just like, what are we going to talk about? So I guess talking about the rookie class again is perfect.
Yeah, I think that's the best topic to talk about right now, especially when we've seen little bits and pieces of these OTAs, these rookie OTAs, and there's a little bit that we can judge from those OTAs and these little clips here and there that we see on the greatest invention for sports guys like you and I, Twitter. So I want to get your thoughts here on this draft class. And really, I got to start off from the top. I like to cover the Buffalo Bills, of course, on this show. But what were your thoughts on the 2021 draft in general, just league-wide? Were there any surprises for you out there from some of these other teams in the league?
Well, I guess if we're going to start at the top, I'll start with the first round. I guess there were a couple of surprises for me, one of them being the Raiders picking Alex Leatherwood over Tevin Jenkins. I mean, obviously it's the Raiders, so of course they're going to pick whoever they want, and it's usually going to be who everyone doesn't pick for them. So that's a whole separate thing. But another one, I guess, would be the fact that the Bears actually did trade up again for a quarterback. I mean, not many GMs get the opportunity to do that once, but to do it twice, that's actually, it's uncharted territories. Like, you know that this is Nagy on the hot seat, the GM there, I think Pace or whatever his name is, probably both of them are on flaming hot seats right now. So that's another one. And lastly, I think another surprise is Travis Etienne actually teaming up with his quarterback, Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. And I know Ryan Talbot released a piece earlier saying that even Etienne was convinced the Bills were going to take him, but obviously with being coming out after the draft saying we never really were targeting a running back, obviously they weren't targeting a quarterback. We have Josh Allen and Mitch Trubisky. We're good there. We don't need one. But I mean, who knows? GMs lie a lot, and it's interesting how it ended up for the first round.
It is. That one was the one that sticks out to me. Travis Etienne reuniting with Trevor Lawrence, I guess, going from college to the pros. I thought that was really cool. The Pittsburgh Steelers, as great as Najee Harris was in college, you know, that Steelers offensive line is kind of a mess right now. So I don't know how successful Najee Harris will be, at least as a rookie. I think as time goes on, he could be really good. But there were some picks there that, yeah, you mentioned the Chicago Bears going with Justin Fields, being able to trade up to get him. And that's the second trade that GM Ryan Pace was able to make, a trade up for a quarterback. The other one being Mitch Trubisky, who is now Josh Allen's backup. But we got to address the elephant in the room here in terms of our squad that we cover. You cover so well with the Buffalo Fanatics and that I cover on my podcast here, the Buffalo Bills. You know, obviously they weren't able to get that running back that the fan base really wanted, it seemed. You know, Zach, you're on Twitter as actively as I am, and you saw how it seemed like a lot of Bills Mafia members wanted the Bills to get that Etienne or that Najee Harris. Were you disappointed that they were able to, that they weren't able, I should say, to get one of those guys? Or do you feel like the direction ultimately that they went in was the right direction in the long run?
Well, I have been very vocal over the past few months of this offseason about saying that I didn't want a running back at 30. Not because I have anything against Etienne, Najee Harris, or Javonte Williams. I'm sure they'll be fine. They're in pretty good situations where they're going. I mean, Etienne might have the worst situation because James Robinson is a stud and it may be a bit crowded there. But as for the Bills, I think it was too early to give up on Zach Moss. And it's too early to give up on Devin Singletary. And I know Tyler Dunn did his piece about Singletary a couple weeks ago that talked about him improving himself with a positional guru, much like Josh Allen did with Jordan Palmer. And also the fact that you saw him working out and saw he's ripped now. So right. I have a lot of confidence in Singletary breaking out this year. Like, I will gladly put my feet to the fire on that one and go for it and just say that I think he bounces back. And I also have to say that, again, Zach Moss, end of last year, he started coming into his own. So I think he could also improve. And then you bring in Matt Breida, who is an experienced guy. He brings that big playability. He has the speed. He has the burst. He has that ability just to run down the field, shoot all the way to the end zone. Like, I kind of call him the road runner because it's almost like when you see him break off a big play, it's like he goes, me, zoom. But it's like, yeah, I think the Bills are fine with a running back committee like that. You have the perfect components for that. So using a first round pick on a running back didn't seem like the best use of resources, especially when you had bigger needs like corner or even edge rusher, which they actually did go with. And I think in that aspect, they did pretty well to get a guy with potential, even though I may personally have not expected them to go that way in the first round.
When you're sitting there and you see the first round play out, you know that Etienne is gone, you know that Najee Harris is gone, you know that a lot of receivers are gone. Not that the Bills needed a receiver, but there were a lot of good ones in this year's draft as well. Even Kadarius Toney kind of goes a little bit later in the first to the Giants. A lot of those skill position players are gone on the offensive side of the ball for the Bills. Not that they needed it, but a lot of fans wanted that splash guy, right? And when the Bills select first-round pick Gregory Rousseau out of Miami Hurricanes, what were your thoughts immediately? Were you feeling like that was the direction you thought they could go in towards the defensive end position, or did you feel like they could maybe go another route at the defensive end position rather than Rousseau?
Well, I would say for my immediate reaction, I did actually, it's funny because for the first couple of rounds, I did live GIF my reaction to those because I'm known for doing GIFs on Twitter. So I did that. I don't exactly remember what my initial reaction was. It might have been the Jim Carrey, oh, come on thing, because I was really adamant about Asante Samuel or a corner like Ife Melifonwu or someone. Ultimately, that didn't happen. But I guess when you get your hopes up about a certain player that falls to 30, you're a little surprised and taken aback by who they actually took. That being said, obviously we've had a lot of time, almost a month, to marinate in the idea of Gregory Rousseau, heard about him being called Groot, about his wingspan, about his athleticism. I also didn't really know much about him pre-draft, so it was nice to learn a bit about him through OTAs, the rookie camp and all that. I'm a bit more confident in that pick, especially because he's not a finished product yet. So the best may be yet to come. And if the front office and coaching staff were as stoked to get him as the embedded episode showed, I think he could develop into a pretty stud. He could be a stud. I will also say, though, that I also really liked Carlos Basham as a potential end of the first round guy. And it's ironic they ended up getting him in the second round, which actually makes it a better pick because who would have thought he would have fallen to 61 when everything came and went.
Yeah, I agree. I think towards the end of the first round, I'm thinking, do they go defensive end? Do they go corner? Asante Samuel was a guy that I liked, and Asante Samuel was a guy that you obviously mentioned as well. Could they have gone with another corner? Could they have maybe gone with a safety that could play both safety and corner? Could they have gone with an offensive lineman? Ultimately, they did in the third round with Spencer Brown, who we'll get to in a little bit. But you mentioned Boogie Basham, and that was the pick that I really liked in this draft. Not to say that Gregory Rousseau is not a fit. I think he is a fit. He's a physical freak. Thing that jumps out at me with Gregory Rousseau, and we'll touch on him as far as my take here, the length, the unique length that this guy has, 6'7". He just needs to get a little bit bigger in terms of his body weight. If he could get to like 280, 285, man, that guy has like Javon Curse-esque athleticism for a defensive end. And Boogie Basham out of Wake Forest now as a second rounder. You go back, Zach, and you look at how we lost and how that season ended for us against the Kansas City Chiefs. We just didn't have the pass rush, and we never really seemed to have the pass rush virtually all season long. So do you think that, the fans kind of missed the boat on what the actual weakness of this team was when we look at how Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott drafted within this draft, with Rousseau first round, 30th overall, and Boogie Basham late in the second, two defensive ends and two guys that are known to get after the quarterback?
Well, I think that ultimately, and this is probably something that everybody's been kind of talking about and lingering on, is they must have literally just been going best player available in this draft. Because obviously when Brandon Beane was talking before the draft about drafting for now and in the future to win now and then in the long term, and he did also say the fact that they needed to address some positions both now and the long term, it actually makes sense that they did go edge rusher twice. I mean, I know that on the Buffalo Fanatics site, one of our writers wrote a fantastic piece the day after they were picked. And it was probably the best explanation you could have given about it. And especially when you think about Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison, how everyone was so displeased with their performance last year, and the fact that they're both coming on the last years of their contracts right now. Addison, because they did the restructure, which voided the third year, which is good. And then you bring in for not one, but two edge rushers. Basham, I would argue, would maybe be more likely to make an instant impact. But you also have Epinesa coming back into year two in the system, probably looking better with his body, because I know that he had to drop a significant amount of weight from college into the pros. And let's be honest, that's probably the only reason Trent Murphy even made the roster, was because he had to do such a drastic adjustment without an off-season workout regimen, without the preseason. So having those three guys to potentially serve as your short-term and long-term option at the rotation position of defensive end, that's well worth the first and second round pick this year, even if you could have gotten a sexier pick at a different position like running back or cornerback. The fact that you now have that core of your rotation set for the next 4 to 5 years is actually pretty huge.
Yeah, and I think they're all on rookie contracts too. I mean, you have Gregory Rousseau on that 5-year deal essentially with the rookie option if they pick that up. In the future, hopefully he plays good enough to be here beyond that rookie contract. You don't want to look at things kind of in that narrow of a space, but it does kind of sneak up on you, as you know, with Josh Allen and Tremaine Edmonds now being in that window where they're in those options, where next year they'll be making the rookie option money, signed through 2022, thank goodness, with those options. But, hopefully Rousseau plays up to that level to be picked up on a rookie option. And I think that, looking at a lot of, what the analysts say of ESPN and the CBS Sports of the world and Yahoo and all the draft gurus out there, it seems like Boogie Basham is looked at as more of an immediate impact guy in comparison to Gregory Rousseau. And Rousseau is someone that, based on the fact that he opted out this past season collegiately, they just don't quite know if he's really ready to take on an NFL starting role right out of the gate. But the good thing is, being drafted by a team as good as the Buffalo Bills, they only need him to be, I guess I could say on a rotation, like 30% or 35%. They don't need him to be this 100%, guns blazing, balls to the wall type defensive end just yet. Eventually, that's what they expect, but they can ease him into that, being that they have Mario Addison and Jerry Hughes already in the fold, and also Boogie Basham with Rousseau in OTAs and training camp. Both of them as rookies are kind of in this together. I thought that actually I was on a drive home from a draft get together that I went to, and I thought the fact that they got two rookie defensive ends, it's like they'll both be in this together. They'll both grow together and go through the same growing pains. How big of a factor do you think that was in terms of bringing in not one but two defensive ends?
Well, I think that definitely helped things along because, like, again, the whole point being is that Addison and Hughes are in the last year of their contracts. They're both on the wrong side of 30, and you were going to have to address the position anyways, which is ironic because that's what fans wanted. Fans wanted the position addressed probably in free agency instead of the draft, but they ended up addressing it in the draft. You got two of them. You're setting yourself up for the next 4 to 5 years of your window. And they do have, I believe they do have enough difference in their skill set where it may actually be a benefit that they did get both of them. Like you said, Rousseau has the crazy length. He has the wingspan. He's 6'7". He literally is Groot, which it's going to be great. I mean, as long as he can put his arms up on every play and just bat balls down if he can't get to the quarterback, it's going to be great. Basham, I think that I've heard that he does have that bit of inside outside Quentin Jefferson versatility. I've heard the same thing about Rousseau as well. If you can have all these versatile pieces that you can move around the D line and confuse the offensive linemen and be able to just line them up anywhere and everywhere, that is going to be great for your pass rush. You give different looks, different pressures. It'll, again, confuse the offensive line. You get a little bit of variance. Whereas last year, you kind of knew Jerry Hughes was going to line up on the outside, Quentin Jefferson would line up inside, and Addison was just kind of on the field. Like, he didn't really do much. But obviously, this year, you know that the veterans are going to mentor the younger guys. The younger guys will try to compete because obviously you're not going to just sit back. You're going to come in and want to be the best you can be day one. So even though a lot of people do say that Rousseau may be more of a project, let's remember too, I think it was 2019 when he had his 15.5 sack season. I think he was still transitioning into being a defensive end. Wasn't he like a safety beforehand or something? And it's ridiculous. Like, he had 15.5 sacks in ACC football, Division I, one of the Power 5 conferences, first year at the position, and he gets 15.5 sacks. Obviously, he did opt out, so we don't know much beyond that. And that's probably, again, like you said, the uncertainty of whether or not he can contribute. But now that you have OTAs, training camp, an actual preseason, 3 games, obviously it's not going to be 4 anymore because of the new schedule, but still 3 is better than none. You'll get to see what he's like, where he's at, how much work they may need to do with him. But worst case scenario, he, like you said, he's like 20%, 30% of the rotation. It's easier to drop him into the fire. Unlike what happened with Josh Allen, it's easier at a position you rotate to ease rookies into that. And I think Epinesa could even step up because he was already eased in. So you may have Epinesa and Basham being the 2 younger guys who actually make more of a contribution this year. Rousseau may just round out the rotation.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the thought of it in terms of how they have kind of set the tone and kind of laid things out for the future, they've drafted 2 rookie defensive ends. They can kind of just leave it alone and kind of just let those guys develop on their own. And obviously with the hope that they develop and succeed, but Epinesa, Boogie Basham, Gregory Rousseau, 3 defensive ends that were all pretty productive in college. Epinesa did leave a little bit to be desired, in my opinion, from his rookie year, but he was a rookie. It doesn't happen overnight for every, rookie defensive end like Chase Young, but to throw Chase Young's name out there, Gregory Rousseau last season, 2 years ago, I should say, was second in sacks to Chase Young, who is arguably the greatest young pass rusher in the league right now. So that just goes to show you the potential that Gregory Rousseau has, and it's going to be a very interesting addition to this defense that really hasn't had that athletic presence on the defensive line really since McDermott got here. No disrespect to Jerry Hughes, but in terms of the physical freakness of Gregory Rousseau, that's few and far between NFL-wide, not just on the Buffalo Bills. So I'm greatly looking forward to seeing how he develops, as is everyone else. So we got our thoughts on Rousseau, Boogie Basham, possibly a dynamic duo, pass rushing duo for the Buffalo Bills for many years to come, hopefully. We gave our thoughts on the strategy in terms of how they attacked the defensive end position in the first and second rounds, but they didn't just attack depth on the defensive line. They attacked depth on the offensive line as well, and they got two guys that I'm referring to from now on as the young mammoths on the offensive line. Two guys that are massive human beings just in general, let alone athletically. How athletic Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle are at the offensive line position, whether it's tackle or guard, given the size that they possess. Spencer Brown, 6'9", 321 pounds out of Northern Iowa. And this guy, he plays big, he is big, and he can put some people down. So what are your thoughts on Spencer Brown out of Northern Iowa? We'll start off with him. And then, I want to get your thoughts. They go D-line, D-line, O-line, O-line with Spencer Brown in the third round, and then Tommy Doyle in the fifth round out of Miami, but out of Miami of Ohio, not Miami, Florida. So Tommy Doyle, 6'8", 326 pounds. So an offensive lineman that's 6'9", and another one that's 6'8". How excited were you when you saw these picks? I was licking my chops when I saw these ones.
Well, I will say the Spencer Brown selection was somewhat bittersweet because I know that Casey Reed at Buffalo Fanatics, he was on the Spencer Brown hype train the entire offseason. He fell in love with him. But one of my draft crushes was a different Division III offensive lineman, a guy named Quinn Miners, the man, the myth, the gut, the legend. I really liked him and the fact that he was available. And when I was like, I literally saw the Bills pick and they said Spencer Brown. It was literally like, oh, you're so close. And then he went 3 picks later to Denver. And I was like, oh, it was just because I thought that me personally, I thought you would have been better off trying to get more interior offensive line help at the position. And Quinn Miners was definitely a process guy. He's definitely a character guy. I believe me and Eric Schmidt couple months ago actually wrote a piece about him, kind of profiling why he'd be a fit for the Bills. He does fit into that mold. He is also one of those athletic guys. But I will say that if there was one person that they were to take instead of Miners, I'm kind of glad it was Spencer Brown because he shows a lot of the same stuff. It just so happens that he plays tackle instead of guard. So obviously they did need a swing tackle and they did kind of need to address the future at the right tackle position because even though Darrell Williams is back for 2 years, I believe that he's only guaranteed 2 years. The third year is just, they have an out after 2 years or something, but the whole point being Spencer Brown can be the swing tackle this year. Also, he'll be that offensive lineman Dable throws out into routes because he's a converted tight end, so it makes sense. Makes a little too much sense. Who knows? Maybe they do stick Bates back out there, but we'll see. And we'll see in September. But I understand the pick. I understand Spencer Brown develops as a swing tackle for this year. Unless he looks super impressive and just blows everything out of the water and takes over the right tackle spot and either forces Darrell inside or out the door, I just see him being a backup for this year. But come 2022, there could be an interesting position battle.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe this is just my crazy theory on the Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle picks, but obviously you want to add depth in the draft. And that's kind of what Brandon Beane talked about. Use free agency to fill your holes with established talent, and then bring in young players to add depth to the team, guys that you can develop over a period of time on the cheap on those rookie contracts, thanks to the new, CBA, the newer CBA, I guess you could say. But what I thought when they drafted Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle is really Darrell Williams' name popped into my head in terms of the 2-year deal, essentially, that he got, not a 3-year. He's really only locked in on the roster for 2. The third was just probably to get him to sign the bottom of that contract. But what does it say about Cody Ford and, the second-round pick, formerly second-round pick by the Bills, of course, a couple years back, where we knew that he was getting closer to being a regular on the offensive line. We didn't really know where he would line up, though, whether it was tackle or guard. He hasn't really established himself at either position. And just as we realize that, and just as he starts to kind of find a niche at guard, he has an ankle injury, and he's out for the entire year last year. So what does this say about Cody Ford? Do these 2 draft picks put pressure on Cody Ford, or do you think that this is more just simply to add depth, and competition obviously is always something that every team in the NFL looks at? Do you think this is a competition draft pick or more just adding depth, or both?
I think the only transactions or acquisitions that put pressure on Cody Ford are Forrest Lamp and Jamil Douglas, because they are both offensive guards. Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle are strictly offensive tackles. So if anything, that's just more, like you said, it's probably more just the depth angle. Like Tommy Doyle is just the 4th offensive tackle, which is fine because you kind of want to have 4 offensive tackles on your roster anyways, should anything happen to the first 2. So Spencer Brown's going to be the swing tackle, Darrell Williams at right tackle, assuming that Spencer Brown doesn't just blow everything out of the water in training camp, which is highly unlikely, though I will give the King some props that there is a possibility that Spencer Brown could beat out Darrell Williams. Theoretically, there is a possibility. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's possible. As for Cody Ford, his real competition, I think, would be Ike Backer, because you brought Feliciano back. He was arguably one of those guys on the offensive line who was kind of just like, he's there, he's reliable, he's dependable. He's probably going to be your starter regardless, even if he's only on if he's on a glorified 1-year contract. But Cody Ford, yes, this is a prove it year for him. Year 3 is a prove it for all rookies. It's if they hadn't already. And like you said, Cody Ford didn't establish himself at a position yet. Year 1, he was platooning with Nsheki at right tackle and only took over because Nsheki got injured. By the way, that's why I think that Spencer Brown pick was also good, because Nsheki was so old, you had to let him walk, and you needed to get younger at that position. And then in year 2, like you said, Cody Ford was starting to play at guard. He was sort of getting into a rhythm, probably would have established himself, but then he had that injury. And now everyone is thinking, well, he's a bust, even though he never really had a chance to establish himself at one position for a prolonged period of time. So Ford's going to have to duke it out. Ike Backer actually pleasantly surprised me late last year, when he got into meaningful snaps and became a starter. And thank God he did, because that meant Brian Winters could sit on the bench, like with 60 feet away from any other living human being in the stadium, like, because we needed to get rid of him.
Right.
So yeah, Ike Backer has a legit shot. I will say this. There are so many positions where we have so much incredible depth. I would argue this is probably the most talented team I have seen in my lifetime in terms of the quality of depth. And offensive guard is going to be a free-for-all come training camp. It's going to be one of those like Hunger Games scenarios where you may very well have a surprise cut from that position, because Forrest Lamp, even though he's had his own injury issues, when he's played, I believe I saw a stat that he only allowed like 2 sacks in like 1,200 snaps or
Right.
something in San Diego / LA, whatever you call the Chargers now. So he is also trying to establish himself and get a foothold. So that's why I say that's going to be one of those position battles to watch in training camp.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Part of what you were saying cut out a little bit, but I was able to hear the majority of it. In terms of the whole narrative that Cody Ford and the Brown pick, as well as the Doyle pick, I like what you said about how Cody Ford won't be impacted by these picks because these guys are more so true tackles, where I agree with you 100%. I think Cody Ford can make a solid living in this league as a guard. I think that's where he could really do some damage. And I say that in a complimentary way. If he's not a tackle, if he was a tackle in college, that's cool. But how do you be successful as a pro? And let's be honest, reel in those big NFL checks, because that's what these guys have worked their entire, youth for, essentially, to get these NFL contracts. So that'll be very interesting. I really like those first 4 picks, though, to address the defensive line, to address adding depth to the offensive line by adding at those positions. I find that to be a smart strategy. Looking at the rest of the draft, in the 2021 draft class expectations show, the 6th round, the Buffalo Bills take a wide receiver out of Houston by the name of Marquez Stevenson, 6'0", 6'0", 190 pounds. But boy, he opens your eyes when you watch the tape. You see a lot of elusiveness. You see a lot of speed, ball carrying vision, return game ability through the roof. And that was something that definitely took a back seat on paper with the departure of Andre Roberts, and Isaiah Mckenzie is back, and we all like him for obvious reasons. He's a solid player for us. But adding depth across the board is what Brandon Beane, I think, did between the defensive line, offensive line, and now the special team side of things, while also adding competition to a loaded wide receiver room in that organization. What do you think Marquez Stevenson's chances are of really making an impact his rookie year, and where do you see him making his impact the most?
Well, funny you mentioned that. I believe it was last week, I posted an article where I did a very premature roster projection because, hey, everyone does it, right?
Right.
You got to talk about something. But anyways, Marquez Stevenson. Yeah, exactly. Marquez Stevenson, I really like the pick because, like you said, the speed, the return ability, the athleticism, that jet sweep experience, all that, it really shines. And when they picked him, I immediately thought that he was going to be Isaiah McKenzie's understudy.
Mm-hmm.
And not to spoil too much of my piece, because you can go check that out on the buffalofanatics.com. But I will say for Stevenson, I do think that he and Mckenzie will both make the roster. And I think it's because I believe it's because they will probably both end up splitting the return duties. And then you have Stevenson just as the backup for Isaiah Mckenzie should he go down on offense. Because we all love Isaiah Mckenzie doing the wheel routes, the motion stuff. And if Marquez Stevenson can do the same thing, and then you have 2 speed receivers that can do that, which is better than 1. And let's remember, Chiefs have Tyreek Hill, but they also have Mecole Hardman. What's better than 1 speedster? 2. So I think that they both make the roster. I think they both have a very good chance at the return positions, that it could very well end up being split, though that's also one of those positions that will be a free-for-all because you have other players who may potentially impact that decision.
I think he's a guy that you look at some of these later rounds, you want to find that talent that is going to go through the grindstone of a rigorous NFL training camp, but a guy that knows it and a guy that's willing to step up and take the challenge. Everything that I've seen from Marquez Stevenson is that he is one of those guys. I put out a tweet that it got a lot of traction, and it's always nice when you put out a tweet, Zach. You know the feeling when you put out a tweet and it gets a ton of traction. My top 5 Buffalo Bills players that I will have my eyes on come training camp / preseason. We only got 3 weeks of preseason now, being that the NFL schedule is now 17 weeks long in terms of games that will be played, 18 weeks long in total. But Marquez Stevenson is number 3 on my list, and number 2 is Isaiah Hodgins. And I have Isaiah Hodgins at number 2 and Marquez Stevenson at number 3 because I think that is going to be a big-time battle in training camp. And I'm not saying that Isaiah Hodgins could get cut, but just in terms of battling for playing time or who wants to let it be known, who can make that immediate impact heading into, this upcoming season. I think Isaiah Hodgins and Marquez Stevenson are going to be in the crosshairs, on third reps or second reps in the OTAs and the training camp, I should say. What are your thoughts on that in terms of who Marquez Stevenson could be battling against to make this roster and ultimately, in your opinion, make the roster?
Well, I think that obviously he'd be battling against all the lower tier guys on the depth chart right now. You have Kumaro, Gentry, Hodgins, Duke Williams, Stevenson. I mean, obviously, like I said, he's more stylistically in terms of his play similar to Mckenzie, and that's why I think some people think there could be a position battle where it's him versus Mckenzie, even though I think they both make the roster. But obviously, I hear a lot of good things about Hodgins, and I remember last preseason there was a lot of praise from the veterans, including John Brown, about him and Gabriel Davis picking up the playbook really quickly. Obviously, unfortunately, Hodgins got injured, so we couldn't see what he could do. I think he could have a good chance to make the roster. Ultimately, this will also depend on whether or not they stick with tendency and keep 6 receivers or 7 receivers, which is also a possibility because there's so much magnificent depth there. But they could even very well end up with like 2 or 3 receivers on the practice squad because they're bringing back the 16-man practice squads this year.
That's correct. Yeah, that could make a huge impact for some of these guys that are looking to make these last few spots of the roster. And maybe who's to say they carried 6 wide receivers last year. Maybe they carry 7 this year. That in terms of how the Bills will put this roster together, it's going to be extremely difficult because I think now more than ever, you have some guys on this team that could get cut that could immediately get picked up by another NFL team and, meaningful snaps for that NFL team. That'll be very fun to see. And the 6th round as well, the second 6th round selection, we got a safety that I really like out of Pittsburgh, Damar Hamlin. The Buffalo Bills have tried to go after guys that play for Pitt the last couple of years. They had Dane Jackson, a corner. Now they add Damar Hamlin, a safety out of Pittsburgh, a guy that can hit, guy that's very instinctive, very smart. There's a little bit left to his game that needs to be, filled out, of course. He's a 6th round pick, but what were your thoughts on the Bills adding him into the mix, Damar Hamlin into the mix with who they have in Poyer and obviously Hyatt as starters? But do you see Hamlin eventually making an impact on this team, in the immediate future or long term?
I think the answer to that is yes. I think he could very well come into training camp, come into the preseason, end up being possibly the 3rd safety. I think he's a perfect replacement for Dean Marlowe. He has that instinctiveness. He has the aggression. Plus, as you mentioned, Dane Jackson, apparently he and Hamlin have literally been playing together since like childhood. So they have that connection. You have that chemistry. So I could see Damar Hamlin in for an extended role, probably sometime in the midpoint of this year, but definitely in the long term.
And in terms of special teams as well, I mean, that's a facet of the game that it seems like it's constantly looked past. We talk offense all the time. We talk defense, but special teams wise, Buffalo had moments last year where their special teams was so, and that's an area that I think was shored up with the pick of Stevenson and Hamlin. And then you have the 3rd 6th round selection, a name that is probably one of the greatest names I've ever seen, let alone an NFL name, Rashad Wildgoose. I have a feeling John Murphy is going to have a lot of fun with that one. He should. Should be easy for him to have fun with that one. Out of Wisconsin, we got him at 5'11", 197. Adding a Rashad Wildgoose to a coach that knows how to maximize the talent of every member of the secondary. That's like Sean McDermott's bread and butter, the secondary, obviously dating back to his days in Philly and Carolina. Do you see Rashad Wildgoose mixing in somewhere along the way with the Trey Whites, with the Dane Jacksons, with the Teron Johnsons? And what is it about Rashad Wildgoose that has you intrigued?
Well, obviously, the thing that has me intrigued about him is his name. I mean, that and also the fact that he will be wearing number 32, which is almost too perfect because the goose is loose. Wild goose chase on every kick return and punt return and on defense. Also, I've seen some people have been dissecting some of his film on Twitter, and it's just he has that instinct like Dane Jackson, like DeMar Hamlin. He has good instincts, good aggressiveness too. He's very physical and aggressive for his size. So he obviously plays like the biggest guy on the field. He has that mentality that Teron Johnson and Jordan Poyer have. So adding that into his incredible meme-ish name that automatically spells success because, come on, Wild Goose. But in all seriousness, I could see him. I think he could make the roster, but he would also maybe get the Dane Jackson treatment where he's that guy that everyone wants to get an opportunity, ends up on the practice squad, maybe gets called up during the season for an injury, but then in the long term, possibly becomes part of the plan. I think he was definitely a steal for them in the 6th round.
I agree. I look at the two guys that I really like in this draft that aren't, the first rounder or the second rounder would be actually 3 of them. I would say Marcus Stevenson, I would say DeMar Hamlin, and Rashad Wildgoose. And that's no slight on their final selection, Jack Anderson, who Tyler Dunn and Ty Dunn, you can follow him on Twitter, former guest of the show. We were referring to him as Little Richie Incognito. I actually reached out to him today, and we were talking, just on Instagram about the draft class. And this guy, Jack Anderson, is a brutal offensive lineman in terms of the way he plays the game. So you get that grit on the offensive line from a young player that I'm keeping my eye on him too come training camp, because it seems he's got a massive chip on his shoulder. And you look at where he came from. Texas Tech is not known for their offensive linemen. Like, I've never heard of an offensive lineman, coming out of there doing really, really well. I've heard of quarterbacks, obviously Pat Mahomes, Wes Welker, Danny Amendola, but offensive linemen, 6'5", 320 pounds. Do you like the fact that they added yet another offensive lineman in terms of depth? And do you see Anderson as a guard or as a tackle?
So I will say how I mentioned earlier about Quinn Miners and how I felt that he would have been better fit because it was interior offensive line. I will say, as the draft went on, initially after Brown and Doyle, I thought, well, they didn't address interior offensive line. Then in the 7th round, you get Jack Anderson, who a lot of people, including some at Buffalo Fanatics, had in the 5th round, had a 5th round grade on. So that made me feel a bit better about the double offensive tackle, the fact they did take a 3rd offensive lineman. And speaking of how we were talking about Cody Ford and the free-for-all at guard, there's someone else. Enter Jack Anderson, Little Richie Incognito, Captain Jack, whatever you want to call him. And he could, like you said, he could be another player that is a wild card in the position battle and just comes in and emerges. At the same token, 7th rounders are rarely guaranteed anything. Mm-hmm. So obviously he is going to have to bust his butt. But if he doesn't, he would be a perfect practice squad candidate. Give him a year on the practice squad, reevaluate next year going into the preseason.
Can you repeat that last part? The last part broke up on me. I'm sorry.
I was just saying that Jack Anderson could be like a wild card in the position battle where he could potentially make the roster, but given that he's a 7th round pick, and we all know what happened with Dane Jackson last year, he was a 7th round pick. He would be perfect. He could be on the practice squad come September.
Yeah, I agree. I think, man, this draft really got me excited for training camp. That's the point of every draft, but this one in particular, I feel like they drafted some freak athletes, massive, massive offensive linemen. I'm calling them the young mammoths for a reason. And I think that, St. John Fisher can't get here soon enough. Whether, St. John Fisher is in the long-term future of the franchise as far as where we will conduct our training camps, that remains to be seen. For now, it is. But for years ahead, it could change. I want to go a little bit around the AFC East as well, in terms of, the fact that we have the Jets, we have the Patriots, we have the Dolphins. I think all three teams got better. I want your take on that. And is the fact that these three teams got better, is it still enough for them to catch up to the Buffalo Bills? That's another question, another topic that I want to give you the floor on. Do you think the Jets, Dolphins, or Patriots are a threat to take down the Bills for their AFC East title?
Well, I will say after this draft, I would almost say that my opinion hasn't changed that much, because I had already thought that the Patriots and Dolphins could contend for the division, and the Jets were a bit a ways off in their rebuild because they are just starting over with their rookie quarterback, their rookie head coach, all that. My opinion hasn't changed that much after the draft, especially because I think that all three teams did pretty well in their drafts. The Jets, they got their quarterback of the future, though the last time they got a quarterback of the future, they traded him to Carolina earlier this offseason, but we'll see about that. And he's already afraid of Gregory Rousseau based on that one photo where he flinched when Rousseau went to do a peace sign. But we'll see. I was surprised that they did take Elijah Moore in the second round, but I think he's a good player, and I think that will be a good draft pick for them. The Patriots, they got their quarterback, Mack Jones. Thank God it wasn't Justin Fields. That's all I'll say about that pick. Mm-hmm. Because I was seriously concerned that they would be the ones to have either traded up for Justin Fields or somehow gotten him. But they also did get Christian Barmore, I believe, in the second round, who many thought was a first-round talent. I don't know too much about him, but he could make the Bills' offensive line have to work that much harder. And plus, they're having their defense come back. A lot of their guys that opted out are coming back, even though Patrick Chung retired, but that's totally different. And on the Dolphins, thank God that the Broncos swooped in and took Javonte Williams and traded up and got him, because he probably would have been their pick. At least that's what I've been hearing. And that
they needed a running back. Yeah.
Yeah. And sure, they didn't end up addressing it. I think they did take Hunter Long, which I know Ryan Sullivan, one of our contributors, is very upset about because he really wanted him for the Bills. But I mean, they did also get Jalen Waddle, fantastic receiver, arguably the best receiver in that draft class, to pair with his former college quarterback Tua, which will be a little awkward because I think Jalen Waddle said he preferred Mack Jones to Tua, but that is kind of funny. But the fact that they still did get one of the best receivers, and their receiving core is stacked as well. They have Fuller coming in on a 1-year deal, Devontae Parker back. They have Waddle. I don't know who else they have, but that's a pretty fearsome threesome right there for their receivers. So obviously for the Dolphins to overtake the Bills, you're putting a lot of pressure on Tua. Obviously he only had about half a season last year. So I'm not ready to say Tua's a bum by any means, because this is only year 2 for him, and really only year 1.5, because like I said, Fitzpatrick started the first 6 or so games and then came in on relief appearances. But now Fitzpatrick's gone to Washington. By the way, Washington had a really good draft, and I think that they are going to be a very good team this year. And then you come in. So now you are handing the keys to Tua. You're saying, here's the Ferrari. Go out there, go drive around, have fun. Don't do too many donuts. Don't get pulled over for speeding. It's his show. They're going to ride or die with him. Obviously, there's still the question mark of whether or not he can be the guy. but he is their guy for the next couple of years. And I think that he could potentially have a breakout year. He could have a breakout year if he can just develop more in his anticipation of zones and all that. If he can get better that way.
Yeah, I agree. As far as the Tua thing, I think with him, I think he can get better. But with him, it's can he get better? He can get better as long as he stays healthy. Like, I don't know. You never know when Tua's hurt. You never know when he's not hurt. You don't know how long the injuries he's had linger. And I watched a lot of Tua at Bama, and the guy that he was in college, not just because it's the college game and the speed of the game in college is slower than the pros, physically in college, he was a marvel. And then he had that hip injury, and I think that hip injury really has sapped his throwing motion as well as his throwing velocity. Whether he ever gets that back or not remains to be seen. But from what I've seen thus far, it looks like that hip injury has really sapped his motion and especially his actual velocity and power on his throws, especially the long ball. And the Dolphins have a lot of receivers that can get that yards after catch in tight spaces, limited windows. They had Chan Gailey there as the offensive coordinator for that slant game that Fitz made famous here in Buffalo with Chan, and they had hoped that they could translate that to Tua, but I don't even really think that that's Tua's game in the sense that he is a guy that could stretch the field. Now he's being forced to be somebody that he wasn't really in college, and I think that right now he's in a little bit of an identity transition. Whether it lasts, or whether it works, whether it's successful, I should say, remains to be seen. But your take on the Patriots with Mack Jones, I want to touch on Mack Jones. I watched a documentary on HBO Max, and it was basically Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, where it talked about their friendship, how they've known each other for 30 plus years, coached together in Cleveland, kept tabs on each other, and have always been really tight. And no coach in the National Football League has drafted more players out of Saban's Alabama Crimson Tide than Bill Belichick. Do you think that this was the right quarterback for the Patriots? Do you think that Mack Jones is the right guy? Or do you think that they missed the boat and they should have went after someone else?
Well, I think it really depends on what they were looking for, because obviously you had Tom Brady for 20 years. You thrived with a pocket passer, a pure pocket passer with limited mobility, but the intelligence to be able to put throws on target and whatnot. Obviously, the one problem with Mack Jones would be the fact that he's coming from a school where he was surrounded by all American talent. He had Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, 2 first-round receivers, and a first-round running back. And all that talent around him, they were open by like 10 or so yards whenever he would throw it to them. The NFL is a lot different. They're going to be covered. The receivers are going to be covered, especially the wide receivers that the Patriots picked up, because no offense to them, but they probably could have done better in that regard. I will say that they did crush it with Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. They were the top 2 tight ends. Obviously, I think they're trying to turn back the clock a bit, go more power run, back to the 2 tight end sets that they had when they had Gronk and Aaron Hernandez. So maybe based on Cam Newton's performance last year, they felt, okay, we tried to go the modern route with the mobile quarterback and it didn't work. Obviously, the only problem is they tried with the guy who has the bum shoulder. So maybe they just feel more comfortable trying to go back to the type of system they had with Tom Brady, but having Mack Jones instead. So I don't know if I can really make a judgment one way or the other on him until I see him on the field. And that may very well be within the first half of the season.
Say that last part again there, or cut out for me. I'm sorry. I heard you say I don't know if they can make a judgment on him, and then right after that it cut out. I'm sorry.
Okay. No problem. I said I don't know if I can really make a judgment on him until I see him on the field. And based on how Cam did last year, of course, this is solely based on how he did last year, it could very well be within the first half of the season if things go bottoms out with Cam again.
Yeah, and I think Bill Belichick, I know Bill Belichick wants to win. And you want to start the guy that has the most experience. That's the guy that gives you the best chance to win on a team that's in a state of transition. But they know what Cam can do and they know what Cam can't do. And they knew that going into this draft, they would have to add someone at that position. You did that. And to your point, it's a guy that fits the mold of what they could do with Tom Brady. Now, I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that Mack Jones is Tom Brady, but he fits the mold of what they could do because Mack Jones is that guy that can get the ball out of his hand really quickly. He doesn't even need to drop back under center, really, to throw the football accurately. That's the one thing. He's got freakish accuracy for a quarterback. But to your point, he was throwing to a guy that could get separation, whether it was Devonta Smith or Waddle or Henry Ruggs. He's throwing to guys that could get that separation. And I think that the Patriots would be best served starting Cam Newton maybe the first 4 weeks. If you go 2-2 in those first 4 weeks, if I'm Bill Belichick, you go 2-2 with Cam, to me that's just not good enough. And I would switch to Mack Jones. Even if you go 2-2 with Cam, I would say, okay, we're not 3-1, we're not 4-0, we're on pace to be a 500 or worse team, being that there's an odd number of weeks this season and for many more now. Let's get the kid in here. Let's see what he can do. And let's throw the playbook at him and let him kind of not necessarily run the offense, but let him run it to the best of his ability. And I think we could see that. Games, Zach, the Dolphins, Patriots, or the Jets, which team do you think is the biggest threat to the Buffalo Bills in the AFC East?
Coming into this year, I think I have to opt for what happened last year. I think the Dolphins at this point are the biggest threat to the Bills this year.
I like that. I like it's tough to say this, but I like what the Dolphins are trying to do. And I don't like the Dolphins. I want to let that be known. But I like what they're trying to do. I respect it. I do respect it. You can respect game recognizes game, right? You can respect Brian Flores and what he's kind of done there and the talent that they got. I mean, I really like what they have in terms of their defense and the way Brian Flores has actually been able to add to it and his fingerprints on it. But, man, I can't wait for this season to get here. I'm not rushing it because I want this beautiful summer to continue. Hopefully concerts in the future, hopefully, trips in the future, traveling in the future. But, man, I can't wait for training camp. This draft class has me pumped. How about you, Zach?
I'm very excited.
Yeah, very excited. Yeah. So, I appreciate you hopping on the show, Zach. This was a great time as always. I'll be sure to get you on again. Folks, follow Zach on Twitter at ZVaughn2712. Great columnist there for the Buffalo Fanatics. He's very insightful, very informative. You can learn a thing or two reading his articles. Appreciate your time, Zach. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to having you on again.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan.
We're at that point where the show's ending, and I already had a technical difficulty. Say your goodbye one more time for me.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I will first start off by saying that I will be taking a bit of a step back from the writing, and that's because I was promoted to chief editor for Buffalo Fanatics like last week. Wow. I'm transitioning into that. I fully intend to continue writing. It just won't be as periodic as it was before. So I will just say, follow everybody at Buffalo Fanatics, follow the podcasters, the writers. We have a lot of great content that comes out almost daily. It's coming out like clockwork, even in the dead time. So go to thebuffalofanatics.com, subscribe to the blog. You can get the articles in your email. It would be great. There's a lot of great content coming out that we're excited about for the preseason. And yeah, I will just say, go to thebuffalofanatics.com to check out everybody's work. And
Yeah.
thanks for having me on.
Of course, yeah. You might be seeing me on the Air Raid Hour with Dave and Judge Mathis pretty soon. I've been talking to Dave about getting on and getting him on, and I got a few associations within the brand, so I look forward to keeping up contact with you guys and keep up the great work. I want to definitely get to your comments here before we wrap things up. I want to get to your comments. So as I bid Zach a farewell, thank you for hopping on, Zach. It was a great time having you on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Keep in touch, buddy.
Thanks, man. You too. Have a good night.
You too. Go Bills.
Go Bills.
That was Zach Vaughn of the Buffalo Fanatics joining me on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, the 2021 Draft Class Expectations Show. I had not gone over the 2021 draft class with anyone yet in terms of the expectations portion. We went over the draft class in terms of the names, the positions, what the Bills did and why they did it, but I didn't necessarily talk about my expectations yet on these players within this class. And I want to get to your comments as well. So let's see what we got here. We have the fact that AJ Epinesa from Nick B says Ep should be a linebacker. I've heard that thought a time or two. I think Buffalo's going to leave him at the defensive end position for the time being. If things do not translate to success, we could eventually see AJ Epinesa moved to linebacker. Ray Andrew says, my issue is backs could lack explosiveness. The issue with our backs is the lack of explosiveness, though. Well, look no further than Devin Singletary's Instagram. You see the progress physically. Devin Singletary looks like a freak of nature right now. He's jacked. He's a muscular, hamster. He looks pretty good physically. So I'm looking forward to seeing a bounce back in year 3. The pressure's on, but he knows it, and he's taking it very seriously. So Ricky Crouch says, good content. Thank you, Ricky. Thank you for joining me on YouTube. Guys, follow along on the Thomas Take YouTube channel, Thomas Take Sports Podcast. The show is not pre-recorded. It is live, always live. So that being said, I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Take care and go Bills.